community associations: Kanata Beaverbrook, Briarbrook, Morgan's Grant, Kanata Lakes, and Acadia. I'm Christopher Browell, Vice President of the Kanata Lakes Community Association, and I will be your moderator this evening. I'd like to welcome the candidates for this evening: Jennifer McAndrew, Conservative; Jennifer Purdy, Green; Jenna Sudds, Liberal; Melissa Conrad, NDP; and Scott Miller, People's Party. The goal of this evening is to provide you, the local voters, with an opportunity to see and hear the candidates and to understand who they are, what they bring to the table, and how they will serve Kanata Carleton as our Member of Parliament. The format of this evening is that candidates will present opening remarks, followed by their responses to questions and closing remarks. The questions have been compiled from a large number of emails from voters. As Rogers TV has already had a Kanata Carleton All Candidates debate on 6 topics, which is available online, the questions for tonight will cover 6 different topics. The order that candidates will speak will change on a rotating basis so that no one candidate is always speaking first or last. Time allowed for each candidate is 2 minutes for opening and closing remarks each, and 2 minutes for each candidate for each question. Candidates will be warned at 30 seconds before the end of their time, and a stop at the end of the provided by our timekeepers. As we have many questions and limited time, we will not be accepting questions from the audience during the meeting. Our expected completion time is 8:20 p.m. The meeting is being recorded and will be available online in 48 hours. Thank you. I would now like to pass the screen to our first speaker for opening remarks, Jennifer Purdy. Welcome, Jennifer.
Hello et bonjour à tous. I am Jennifer Purdy. I'm representing the Green Party. I'm a medical doctor, a Canadian Armed Forces veteran, small business owner, and a farmer. As a leader, I have led people in the military, and I've also led medical teams. I grew up in Beaverbrook, Canada, and left to go to university. I joined the military and served across the country. In 2015, I was posted back to Ottawa, so my spouse, Phil Whalen, and I, we bought a farm in Dunrobin. In 2018, I voluntarily released from the military and I opened my own medical clinic still here in Canada. The timings of this election are unfortunate. We are experiencing the 4th wave of the pandemic. Parents and educators are worried about sending their kids and going back to school. And the election was called even though Kabul was under attack, resulting in broken promises and lives lost. And yet here we are. The only silver lining I see is that this election gives us an opportunity to make a choice and for us to reset our plans as a nation and as a community. We can see the effects climate change is having on our community more and more, especially this summer. Air quality readings in Kanata Carleton have been worse, inside or outside, than even in downtown Ottawa. We have also seen the significant inequity that exists in our society, seen more clearly as a result of the pandemic. You may not have voted Green before, but please vote for me, Jen Purdy. We have had Conservative MPs and we've had Liberal MPs. If they had the answers and the political will, then we shouldn't be where we are now, with climate change worsening and with vulnerable people largely ignored in our society. Your vote for me will make a difference because I will only be working for Kanata Carleton, not for my party, not for large corporations. We have an opportunity to take a positive, assertive approach to climate change. And at the same time, we can do a better job of taking care of people and of ourselves. I am the most qualified candidate here, and as a doctor and a veteran, clearly I can best serve Kanata Carleton. I'm the only candidate here who is free of party constraints and who will truly represent your interests and not the interests of a party. Unlike the other candidates, I can promise and keep my promises. I'll work with MPs from all other parties so that we can move in a positive direction. Thank you.
Jenna Sudds.
Thank you. Good evening. Bonsoir. As many of you may already know, my name is Jenna Sudds, and I am running to be your local member of parliament so that I can continue to represent you and advance your best interests right here in Kanata. I'm proud to call Kanata home. It's where I've raised my family and where I've worked to support over 500 businesses of all sizes as the founding president of the Kanata North Business Association. And of course, I've had the honor to serve you as City Councillor for Kanata North over these last 3 years and as Deputy Mayor for our city. In the week since our first debate, it's exciting to share with you the news that a re-elected Liberal government will prioritize construction of the next phase of LRT, connecting Kanata to the rest of Ottawa. I've spent my elected career fighting for this project, and I will fight once again to see it to completion. While other parties have made plans for childcare that do not create a single new space, the Liberal plan is a plan that's providing new spaces as well as quality, inclusive childcare at $10 a day. We've also made commitments to make sure that buying a home is within reach. We've created a home buyer's bill of rights and will double the first-time home buyers tax credit. I'd be remiss if I didn't touch upon COVID and the pandemic and how we will ensure the health and well-being of our communities. I'm a mother of 3, and I believe strongly that vaccines save lives. We need to listen to the public health experts and get vaccinated if you can. This protects us, our parents, and our children. For over 2 decades, I've been fortunate to serve as your neighbor, your business partner, and your elected voice right here in this community we call home. I'm running to serve you in a new capacity, but one in which I will continue to defend your interests and advocate for the programs and services that you require and you deserve. Together, we'll get through this pandemic, and I'm confident that it is the Liberal Party that has the best plan to make life better for you and your family. Thank you.
Thank you. Melissa Conrad.
Thank you. I want to start by acknowledging that we are on the unceded territories of the Algonquins and unceded and unsurrendered territories of the Algonquins. And I want to start by saying that this election is not really about choice, like the Liberal government is alluding to. This election is really about courage, and it's the courage to vote your conscience and the courage to vote the person that will best represent you in Parliament. And as a healthcare worker, having worked through this pandemic and seen firsthand the struggles that people have gone through, I feel like I have an inside knowledge on how we can get people out of this. The NDP has the courage to bring forward a great recovery plan, and we also have the $10 a day childcare and universal pharmacare that is still absolutely on the forefront for a lot of people. As we went through this pandemic and saw the lack of supports in many areas, pharmacare came up very large when people had to decide between whether they could provide food, housing, and medications to loved ones. Medications often went by the wayside, and emergency departments were overwhelmed as a result. So as New Democrats, we're excited to put forward our platform that is absolutely courageous to bring people out of this with the supports that they need, with really bold climate targets that will get us back on track and get that ball rolling and started, like Jennifer alluded to, that we are in one of the worst positions of any of the G7 countries as far as climate goes. Affordable housing, affordable childcare that we need more of, absolutely. And we'll pay for all of these things with the wealthiest among us paying their fair share, as well as the biggest polluters. The tax is not going to end up, the tax increases are not going to end up on average Canadians like you and I. It's going to go to those that can afford to help us out of this pandemic. I will show you through this whole platform that the NDP is not only the best choice for Canadians to recover, but the only choice to have the courage to bring you out of this pandemic.
Thank you. Scott Miller.
Good evening. My name's Scott Miller. I'm here with the PPC, the People's Party of Canada. I'm a software engineer. I've worked in Kanata and West Nepean. BNR was my first job for a long time, 30 years now, 30 plus years. As an engineer, I'm used to dealing with the world as it is, not with the way you would like it to be, not with the way you imagine it is, but as the reality presents itself. What we can see is in the last 18 months, the public health response to the pandemic has been the greatest public health disaster in the last century. There are more people killed by the lockdowns than there were killed by COVID. And the number is mounting. There's more mental health crises every day. Our children will be dealing with for decades to come. We cannot count the toll that this is taking on people, on individuals. The answer to that is freedom. The more freedom, the better. The more you get to decide what to do with your life, the better off we all are. Not everybody makes the right choices, but it is critically important that you decide for you and your family what is the right thing for you. So if you wanted to lock down and stay in your house, you are always welcome to do that. But if you want to lock other people down, that is an inappropriate response. What's happened is our public health officials and elected officials locked down hundreds of thousands, millions of other people's businesses. They declared your businesses not essential. They declared your kids' educations not essential. They're declaring you not essential. While they never lost us a day's pay in the entire during the entire response. Many of our federal civil servants got to stay home. We did not have a work at home program in place, so they were stayed home and they got paid. So they're all happy. So I'm not doing this. I'm fighting for your freedoms, not just for mine. I, of course, have certain interests in freedom. I'm a gun owner. I like to go out and poke holes in paper targets. There's a big problem with that. I just saw the 22nd and it made me forget what I was going to say. Fighting for your freedoms, not mine. As a computer engineer, I've been here in my fortress of solitude for the past 18 months and loving it. I'm never going to a cube farm again. The lockdowns have been okay for me, but they're not for you. And so we're fighting first and foremost against lockdowns and for freedom. That's the People's Party. That's our platform, essentially.
Thank you. Jennifer McAndrew.
Great. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here with you this evening, even if it is virtually. It's still great to see people. So my name is Jennifer McAndrew, and I am the Conservative candidate for the Kanata Carleton riding. I wanted to start off by giving you all some insight into my background and why I am running to represent you on Parliament Hill. For those of you who I haven't had a chance to meet in person yet, hopefully soon, but I'm fortunate to have very deep roots here in Kanata Carleton. I grew up in Beaverbrook on Carr Crescent, back before there was a golf course. I bought my first home in Glencairn right on Castle Frank Road. I started my business in my garage in Morgan's Grant, and now I'm raising my kids here in Carp. So hopefully the internet's good the whole time, but we'll see how that goes. You know, I'm sure that growing up here is why I'm so passionate about contributing back to Kanata Carleton and creating a strong and vibrant community fabric and a legacy for my children. I truly believe it's our responsibility to give back when we have that opportunity. And I've been able to contribute in numerous fundraising ways to community groups, minor hockey, fine arts, and even the Kanata Food Bank. I continue to be involved in the community. I have a background in fine arts, so I'm actually on the faculty of the West Carleton School of Performing Arts, where I get to teach ballet to kids a couple nights a week. I'm also a board member with the Dave Smith Youth Treatment Center, a board member with the West Carleton Minor Hockey Association, and a founding member of the Ottawa-Gatineau Wedding Industry Association. So way back in 2007, my husband and I started our business part-time in our garage in Morgan's Grant. You know, we grew steadily. Before the pandemic, we were growing to a full-time enterprise with over 17 local employees. Now, like so many other hard-hit sectors, we're really struggling to find staff to fill these available openings because we can't find people to work. I can truly say that I understand the struggles of small business, especially over the last 2 years, because I've lived it every single day. I know what it takes to meet payroll and to be the last to get paid, and I believe I have a responsibility to take care of my team first. I experienced firsthand the lack of ineffective support for small business in the Liberal government's response to the pandemic. This made me realize I could either sit back and watch or step up and work for change. So obviously, I chose the second option. I put my name forward, I did the hard work to win the nomination, and I became the Conservative candidate. You know, I've talked to you at the doors. I share your concerns. This election will be a choice between a strong Conservative plan to deliver jobs for all Canadians, restore public finances versus reckless Liberal spending that will leave Canada with high levels of debt, inflation, and unemployment for years to come. The Conservative Party are the best party to secure your future. Let's get to work. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the opening remarks segment of the session. We'll now proceed to the question and answer period. As I mentioned, we have 6 topics that will be covered this evening. I'll introduce the topic, read the question, and then we'll proceed in the announced order of the speakers. The first topic is community growth. Projections for the Kanata North Tech Park will add 30,000 employees in the next 10 years, which would effectively double the population of Kanata North. Our current infrastructure, particularly in community transportation, is inadequate to handle this level of growth. Given that infrastructure improvements rely heavily on federal and provincial funding, how would you ensure that our neighborhoods have the infrastructure required to support this surge in population? Jenna Suds.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Chris. And I certainly do get excited when we talk about the future of our technology park, Canada's largest technology park. I had the honor of being the founding president of the Business Association and really value the tremendous innovation that is coming from the people and the businesses that come to work every day in the technology park. I know currently, I believe we're at about 24,000 people who work in the park every day. The forecast number, I believe that you mentioned, Chris, was 30,000. So certainly increasing. I think it is important to note that only about 50% of the people who work in the park live within 5 kilometers. It is the second largest employment node in our city. So there are people coming from across the city to work here. And that is why it is important that we make sure that we have a strong infrastructure to support people traveling to and from the park. And that is a commitment to LRT. Light rail transit is electric. It decreases our carbon footprint, and it's an investment in our future. As the city continues to grow, and we know will be 1.4 million within the next 2 decades, we need to ensure that we are connected to the rest of Ottawa. And our Liberal government is committed to making sure that we complete that next phase of LRT into Kanata. Secondly, we need to think about how we move people from that spine of LRT into the park. And I've had the privilege of working on a steering committee with the Business Association that's just completed a feasibility study looking at electric autonomous shuttles. We've got 2 lines planned, a green line and a blue line that will transport people to and from the park and around our community. And that's the type of investment that our Liberal government is ready to make and that we need to make to continue to foster the growth and support the infrastructure needs of our technology park.
Thank you, Jenna. Melissa Conrad.
Thank you. So as we all know, getting to and from Kanata itself can be challenging sometimes. There are a lot of cars on the road going into Kanata, and it has been widened, but it's definitely not enough, as we see every single day, which adds to issues with air quality and climate issues with idling cars. And so we are happy to announce that the NDP will be looking to pay their fair share of the LRT, specifically in Ottawa, large cities like Ottawa, to make sure that we can have the greenest transportation possible. I'm also excited about electric buses and the innovation of electric buses in cities and in Ottawa specifically. And with that, we do know that there are a large number of smaller pockets of communities in Ottawa, we're hearing, that don't have good bus routes that come right out into their areas. So we need to not only get the LRT up and running, but to get people around within Kanata, we need to ensure that we expand the bus service that we do have and make sure that when the buses get transitioned to electric, that we are able to expand the routes. As you know, Kanata is growing outwards and expanding outwards a lot. And we need to make sure that we have the capacity to bring the LRT to Kanata and then look at bringing it beyond Kanata, because like Jenna said, not everyone who works at the high-tech park lives right around there. And if we have the capacity to bring people in from Stittsville and in from CARP with that green technology as well, we need to have a plan in place to invest in that as soon as possible as well. And the NDP has made it very clear that we are going to invest in the technology upgrades, the research, and the green transportation for major cities. So I'm excited to be able to bring that out to Kanata and beyond.
Thank you, Melissa. Scott Miller.
The tech industry is singularly well suited to remote work, which is something I pushed in 2019. And with we've got to be careful about projections from 10 years out, because this is really, this is a major disruption in the thinking of people and the thinking of companies. We're just going to have to see how society responds to the situation we've just been going through. There's a lot of millennials. For a long time, they wanted to be downtown. That's where the people are. They can use the parks. Everything's good. There's lots of shared facilities. Well, they were locked in their homes for a year. They couldn't go out. You couldn't take your kid to a park. And that's going to burn. That's going to leave a mark. And there's a lot of people getting out of cities and moving into more distant areas, rural. Nova Scotia's real estate's going through the roof, and New Brunswick. And what I can do here in my office, I can do in Nova Scotia, and I can do in Winnipeg. I can do in Red Deer, as long as I have decent internet. So the projections of 30,000 growth, physical growth, seats growth in Kanata, I think would be a little suspect. Efficient transportation is important, but you'll recall what we've all been taught as kids is reduce, reuse, recycle. The first step is to reduce the need to transport back and forth. And we've done that. We had one of the huge benefits of this pandemic, and something I really hope that sticks, is that we've made 10 years forward progress in telework in the last 9 months. We tried it, teleworkers tried back in you might not remember the 80s, but I remember the 80s. We tried it before, and with modems and poor connections, it wasn't great. So companies tried it for a little while and then they went away. Now we've got virtual telepresence, high definition everywhere. And it's a very different environment. I transitioned seamlessly from an office, dealing with people locally. I talk every day with people in India, in the United States, in Mexico, and here locally in Ottawa, and it's fine. So we'll change the transit needs going forward, and we want to be careful about that. But the one big thing I said there is internet access, and 2/3 of this riding has crappy internet. That hasn't changed. We need to fix that, and that would be get it with the CRTC, find out what's wrong, go to Storm and figure out how to fix it. And that's really the one enabler for the people of Kanata Carleton to be able to join full speed with the internet revolution.
Thank you, Scott. Jennifer McAndrew.
Great, thank you so much. Like all of my fellow nominees and candidates, I realize the importance of LRT to our community, to Kanata North and beyond. What I think we really need to be focusing on is how this transit system can connect Kanata to the rest of Ottawa. We can bring in hospitality, we can bring in tourism, we can make this even more of a world-class destination. I am so proud that the Conservative Party has publicly committed to prioritizing funding for stage 3 of the LRT. As most people know in Ottawa, and I'd like to correct one of my fellow nominees, the Conservative government they invested in step 1 first. They saw the value of getting the LRT out to Kanata, and that's what we've done. They did also commit to stage 2. There was a switch in power, but it was the Conservative plan to realize the importance of the infrastructure for our area out here. I am thrilled that we'll be able to do that. Having worked in the tech park, I realize there's value there, but I think that we need to look at the entire riding and see the value of moving people. I echo exactly what Scott said in terms of rural internet. I'm out in CARP tonight, so it's pretty quiet in our office. So hopefully the internet stays, but it's touch and go. And the Conservative Party has committed to having rural internet by 2025. So we have a timeline because we realize that this is so important to so many people, and we will continue to work to do that to make it accessible to everyone. I think we need to look at the Liberal record here for just a second. Back in 2016, they committed $14 billion to infrastructure projects. Since then, they've maybe been able to do half of that amount. They're still not shovels in the ground, and they're not able to get the projects done. I'm proud that the Conservatives have a plan to focus on the LRT to Kanata, and Aaron O'Toole himself has specifically committed to getting LRT to Kanata, which is exciting for all our residents.
Thank you, Jennifer. Jennifer Purdy.
Thank you. So climate change is obviously worsening around us, and air quality has been terrible this summer in Ottawa, but also in particular, it's actually at times been worse in Kanata Carleton because of the fires and I'm assuming weather patterns. And yeah, as Jen was just saying, the Liberals have been dragging on getting LRT. And we've also obviously had issues at the city level in terms of passing SNC Lavalin when they couldn't even pass the technical specifications for one competition. So the Green Party, obviously, we're green. So we are completely committed to LRT extension to Kanata. Also, the other thing too is for people in the high-tech industry, I live in Dunrobin, so I actually drive through the high-tech spot in Kanata Carleton almost on a daily basis. And therefore I'm seeing people cycle in as well and taking OC Transpo. So obviously OC Transpo will be involved not only for the LRT, but also getting people from LRT to their place of work, number one. And then number two, driving down Carling Avenue, we need dedicated safe bicycle lanes and throughout Kanata Carleton to allow people, whether they're biking in through Carling Avenue, whether they're biking in through March Road, they need to have safe access to be able to get to their place of work if they choose to bicycle. It should be safe. It should not be putting your life on the line just to be able to get to work. To touch on bandwidth and internet, a fantastic point. That was immediately my first thought. Of course, with the pandemic, we've all started to think about working from home more, and that's another way to basically give people better quality of life and less commute as well. But one thing, I apologize in advance because I too might cut out tonight. I'm in my practice in Kanata, March Road at Terry Fox, because in Dunrobin, I have two types of internet right now because of the election. Neither of them are reliable. And even tonight, it's been coming up unstable a couple of times while I've been on here with you. And so if ever I get cut out, please carry on and I apologize. But reliable internet, it's obviously an issue in Dunrobin, Carp, Kinburn, and beyond. Like Scott said, I will agree with him on this. CRTC does need to be involved because everyone, even if they're downtown Ottawa, but if they have 3 kids playing games on the internet and they're trying to work and their partner's trying to use Zoom or whatever, we need to have reliable, high-speed, quality internet, but at a reasonable price as opposed to paying some of the top fees around the world. It's inappropriate.
Thank you. That concludes responses to the first topic. We'll now proceed to the second subject, which is domestic violence and gun control. COVID-19 has led to an increase in domestic and gender-based violence. Kanata households are not immune, and we have seen victims ask for help through anonymous postings on local and social media groups. How would you contribute to reducing this problem and supporting victims? Where do you stand on gun control? We'll begin with Melissa Conrad.
Thank you. So I think that this pandemic has absolutely highlighted the shortfalls and the lack of supports in our mental health access for people, and for any sort of therapies that are needed, medications that are needed, that really have made basically a pressure cooker for people's anxiety and stress, and adding to domestic violence through COVID. We've seen it. And so we need to invest in our healthcare system because there are so many cracks that the Band-Aids can't fix it anymore. And the NDP has committed to increasing the provincial funding from 3% to 6%. And I think that's going to help alleviate some of the constrictions that we currently have. But further to that, we really need to make sure that we have community supports outside of hospital supports, because the hospitals are overrun with people that can't get the help that they need. So I think that investing in community supports for people so they can walk in without needing their credit card and not without paying $300-400 an hour to speak to someone, to be able to convey that they need help at home will help many, many Canadians, because there's a big issue with that. And as far as gun control goes, I think this is an ongoing conversation that we have every election. And I grew up around guns. My entire family hunts. I grew up in the country. And I think that guns need to be used responsibly. And I think that we need to really, really focus on where illegal guns are coming into this country, because it is not lawful gun owners that are committing crimes with weapons. It is illegal gun owners and these shipments of guns coming in from other countries that gang members and radicalist groups are getting a hold of, that are causing a lot of the violence on our streets. And we need to invest in cracking down on these guns coming into the country so that people cannot get their hands on them. And then we will be able to lessen the gun violence that we have out on our streets.
Thank you, Melissa. Scott Miller.
I think the pandemic has heightened, there's another pandemic, there's a silent pandemic of despair in people. And I see it, you hear it, people you talk to. There is, we've had a baseline of mental health issues all along, but we're going to see this peak, I think, come to a crescendo at some point in the future, because this is really hard on people, the way we've approached this. And likely for everyone you hear about, there's 2 or 3 more people suffering at home or close to snapping. And we absolutely need mental health supports. I don't know how to deal with mental health. It's not my field, but we absolutely need to be able to help people before they get to the point where they take it out on their kids, take it out on their spouse, take it out on random people they see in the streets. There can be no debate there. And it is, I will restate, it is going to get worse, because the longer this goes on, the longer we stay away from normal. The government's approach toward domestic violence, or the government's approach toward gun crime, and I would say those are 2 completely separate topics, has been absolutely contradictory. They've been tightening down on legal gun owners who follow every silly rule, even all the rules. We try to stay within the bounds. I myself am a gun owner. The rules we have to follow to stay on board are quite stringent, very stringent indeed, and they're just getting more and more tight. I have one of the evil AR-15s that I've never fired, because I've been unable to take it to the range. Now, the range was closed most of last year, but it's a very popular sporting rifle for a reason. It's inexpensive and it's modular. It's great fun, but you don't see those being used in street crime. At the same time, they're cracking down on sport weapons. They're reducing restrictions on, or reducing the penalties on, gun smuggling and gun use coming into the country. The epidemic of violence we see in Toronto, mostly in Toronto, although it used to be that Ottawa, it was very rare in Ottawa, and it's not anymore. These are illegal handguns. Guns have never been registered. People do not have their ATTs, their authorization to transport. They're not going to a range. They're not using legal magazines. It's completely the wrong audience. You're much safer, statistically speaking, in a room filled with gun owners than with the random general population. So it's with that dual, completely inexplicable approach the government's been taking, it leaves us just wondering why. What's the agenda there? It's just insane.
Thank you, Scott Miller. Jennifer McAndrew.
Yes, thank you so much. I think we can all agree the pandemic has pushed many of us to our breaking point, and I think we're seeing that with an increase in domestic violence with less options to leave. You know, the Conservative Party, we're proposing tougher sentences on abusers while making it easier for the victim to escape and start over again. You know, we need to strengthen the criminal code so that, you know, there are larger penalties and jail time for these abusers. You know, we need to make it easier for women, and it's, you know, these are real people we're talking about, and we need to do something that will have a tangible result and will make a difference. Similar to what Scott and Melissa said, I think that our gun policy is different than domestic violence. You know, we're seeing homicide rates going up under the Liberal government. Gun violence has actually gone up, and it's exactly that. We are penalizing lawful gun owners. So earlier this year, it got postponed a couple times with the pandemic, but I actually went and did my PAL license, which is the purchase and acquisition license, to learn about the process of getting a gun license like through the legal means. It was an extensive process. It was 2 days of in class, some hands-on work, and then you have to register, and then you go through the RCMP. So it's a process that takes 6 to 8 months to do it legally. So I don't think it's the legal gun owners. We're seeing it's the illegal trade in guns that really is causing these problems, and putting restrictions on the legal gun owners is not what we need to be doing, because that's not stopping the crime that we're seeing in cities with illegal guns. We need to stop smuggling. We need to put resources into the CBSA so that we're able to stop this before it becomes a problem. Repeat offenders, if you're caught with multiple things like that, then penalties need to reflect those actions. And that's where we'll see the difference. To be a legal gun owner, your license and background is checked every single day by the RCMP to make sure that you're still upholding your end. And if there's anything that's been brought against you, you will lose your right to have your gun. So I think that we often mistake how difficult it is and how responsible firearm owners are, the ones who do it properly. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Jennifer Purdy.
Hi, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great, excellent. Sorry, it just froze again. I apologize. So, so I do agree with the others that domestic violence has it does have a relationship, though. It does have a relationship with firearms, of course. Firearms are, I believe, the second or third leading cause of death for death by suicide in men in Canada. So, and it can have a role to play in domestic violence. So it's not completely different topics, but most of the time, of course, domestic violence is not occurring in the context of people with firearms in the house or using firearms. So a couple of things about domestic violence. Stressors can be like isolation, mental health can be an impact, but oftentimes it's also what a person's been exposed to growing up. If they've grown up in a house with domestic violence, and they are more likely to either to be a victim of or to perpetuate that themselves once they become an adult. There are some programs out there, and they do need to have continued funding from provincial and as well as federal levels. And one excellent program is Men and Healing, formerly known as the Men's Project. A couple of other thoughts about domestic violence. Some of the Green Platform ideas that was released today: guaranteed livable income, affordable housing, because one of the big things is a person, usually a woman, is most in danger when they decide to leave that abusive relationship. And therefore, if they're able to leave and not have financial concerns, because that's one of the reasons why women oftentimes will stay, or the person who is economically disadvantaged will stay, with a guaranteed livable income and with affordable housing, then that obviously makes leaving less treacherous from a financial security perspective. About firearms, obviously, I agree with everyone else. We need to get the illegal firearms and illegal handguns, which are crossing the American border, off the streets. But already there's actually a fair amount of gun control occurring in Canada as it is. But it's usually the illegal weapons that are being used in mass killings and that sort of thing.
Thank you. Jenna Suds.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So I think I'll start with your first question, which was my position on gun control. I'm proud to be seeking to serve all residents of Kanata Carleton, which is a diverse riding, we'll acknowledge, both suburban and rural constituents. But I want to begin by acknowledging that the majority of gun owners are very responsible and law-abiding. And as your member of parliament, I will always respect those legal gun owners who purchase their firearms legally and store them securely and use them responsibly. None of the Liberal proposals are intended to restrict legitimate activity of hunting or of farming, which does not require a rifle designed for military purposes. So through legislation, we have taken action to enhance background checks, to better detect anyone with a history of domestic abuse, as an example, and to ensure that those without a legitimate license cannot purchase firearms. Our prohibition is intended to ensure public safety first and foremost, and that's by making it far more difficult for a person with criminal intent to actually obtain a firearm that has been specifically designed for military purposes. So we've seen too many instances. There was a shooting last night in Kanata South, for example. We've seen too many instances where too many lives have been taken with minimal effort. And I would note that the current president of the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police has said that this is not limiting those that recreationally participate in hunting or those that actually live off the land. The second piece of your question, Chris, was with respect to increased domestic violence and how we'll work to address that. And certainly the COVID pandemic has exacerbated and has shone a light on this terrible situation. The Canadian Women's Foundation has noted that in Canadian households, the presence of a firearm in a home is the single greatest risk factor for lethality in intimate partner violence. Just having that gun in the house is the single greatest factor. And we know that over the past 5 years, roughly 500 women per year have been victimized by partners with a firearm. So the Liberal government has passed legislation, it's called C-71, which was passed in 2019, which, among other things, does expand background checks to determine eligibility for firearms licenses from what was 5 years to now the entirety of a person's life. So that expanded grounds for these background checks must be considered, including an applicant's history of any intimate partner violence or online threats. So we've made some great progress in this regard. There's still work to be done. I would note that the president of the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police at the time when this bill was put forward deemed it as essential, and everyone agreed except the Conservatives. The Conservatives voted against the bill. O'Toole has committed in his platform, page 90, to repeal the bill in its entirety. So the Conservatives have gone back and forth on this issue. Our platform, we're committed to the introduction of red and yellow flag laws. Together, they're called extreme risk laws. And I feel very strongly that the Liberal Party is working for gun control and the Conservative Party is working for the gun lobby. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenna. That concludes responses for the second two questions on the second topic. We'll now move to our third topic, which is climate. Kanata Carleton has seen 2 100-year floods and a major tornado in the last 5 years. These events underscored that the current infrastructure is unable to deal with extreme weather, and that the families impacted by these events face a long and difficult recovery due to slow financial support and insurance payouts. How will your party address Canada's lack of readiness for dealing with increasingly extreme weather events? Scott Miller.
There's a lot of am I unmuted? Okay, good. There's a lot of contradictory information on this, but insurance companies generally say that the value of damage caused by storms is not increasing. What happens as you get more population, you get more built up, there's more vulnerable infrastructure. The tornado in Dunrobin, if it had gone 200 yards north, would have been a brief story of interest for a day. The fact that it did a direct hit on a row of houses is what caused the damage. I've heard, my father used to tell me, he told me a story. He used to work up in the north in Canada, and he was driving down the road to his work one day, and he came across a section of forest, which is as far as 400 yards wide and as far as the eye could see was stripped of trees. What that was some sort of tornado, and it didn't cause any damage. Nobody noticed it. So I don't think you can say that weather events are getting more extreme. It's not supported by evidence in most cases. What happens is people have a lot more cameras. We see it instantly. If there's a tornado in Kansas and somebody has a cell phone, there it is. A hurricane comes in and we can actually watch the live video as the winds get to 150 miles an hour, which is awesome and terrifying. But it's a matter of publicity. It's just a matter that more people are aware all the time. The insurance companies will say that there isn't a great increase in storms. In terms of preparation, what we do as a nation is to be ready for all kinds of contingencies. Hurricanes are events that happen over a very large area and they last for a long time. They're quite different. Fortunately, we don't get a lot of those. Tornadoes are very localized. So the response, although similar, is going to be different. The example I used before is the DART. Canadian Forces had a DART team. It's a disaster response team. What they do primarily, they deliver fresh water to people. So if there's an event, you get there, you deploy the military quickly, and fresh water is going to be your number one need people have, and they can do that quickly. That's the kind of thing a government can prepare for. Floods, we see they happen. We have the situation in New York just recently. We watched the spectacular video of the water cascading down the subways. Turns out the subways they're just not designed for that. They were not designed for 5-year floods, never mind 100. So there are things we can do, but there's actual concrete things we can deal with and not worry about what the world does.
Thank you, Scott. Jennifer McAndrew.
Yes, thank you so much. I can speak firsthand. I know that the last 3 years have been hard out in Dunrobin with the extreme weather that we've experienced. I mean, I've helped clean up broken glass from our dance studio parking lot because they got some debris thrown at them. So I know that this is impacting people's livelihoods. This is taking away their homes. Unfortunately, there's nothing we can do to change the past, but I think what we need to do is build a resilient tomorrow so that we can protect people. We can protect their homes. We can protect their memories so that they're not going to lose anything. I know our business, we were able to help out with some of the fundraisings because there just wasn't a lot of relief, and people literally in the fall lost everything from hockey equipment to photo albums, everything that they held dear when that tornado hit and touched down in Dunrobin. What we need to have is something to mitigate these problems. We're seeing the extreme weather, which is horrible, but we need to build our infrastructure so that it's capable of sustaining these extreme heats, the lows, the highs that we face out here in Ottawa. That's what we need to do. We want to be prepared for the next crisis, which hopefully doesn't come anytime soon. But we've seen the flooding out in Constance Bay. We've seen people running their pumps 24 hours a day, praying that they don't run out of power to do this so that they can save their homes where their family is. And we just need to make sure that our infrastructure plan is there and that it's designed specifically to help during these extreme weather events. We want to work with the municipalities so that they can be as prepared with federal funding as possible, because we realize that this is important. Someone sitting in, an office in Toronto isn't going to know what it's like in Dunrobin. So we really need to see our municipalities involved in these planning things so that we can be prepared at the end of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Jennifer Purdy.
So before I talk about mitigation and adaptation, I don't know about everyone else, but when I've learned how to put out fires in the military and that sort of thing, I've been taught you don't throw oil and gas on a fire. So while we are getting more extreme weather events, maybe we should stop building the Trans Mountain Pipeline, the extension pipeline, because it is projected to take us to 3 to 4 degrees of warming. And here's a hint, we haven't even hit 1.5 yet. So stop the pipeline and stop the subsidies, because why worsen the situation that we are already in any more than is absolutely necessary. Now let's talk about Kanata Carleton. So we do need mitigation and adaptation. And yes, we definitely want to have our infrastructure prepared so that if there's a flash flood, basements in Glencairn, Bridlewood, Beaverbrook, wherever will not be all flooded. We need to, and these communities, as someone that was, I think Jen was alluding to before, they were built in the late 60s, if we're talking Beaverbrook and that sort of thing. So the infrastructure is a little bit dated. It should be reviewed, and improvements need to be made. Does the city of Ottawa have that money? Of course it doesn't. So the money needs to flow from the federal government, which of course has benefited from the decades of oil and gas industry and that sort of thing. So other issues that are coming down, well, pardon me, they're not even coming down the pipe, no pun intended, but insurance. Talk to the people in Dunrobin who had the tornado, and some of them did not have to fight with their companies, the insurance companies, but some of them did. And rebuild was delayed by years. And just imagine the amount of emotional stress. We've already talked about mental health tonight. Imagine the mental health stress when you don't know if you are going to be able to have a home again to live in, or your business is going to be able to recuperate. failed crops. We have had failed crops this year because of the weather patterns. There was a late frost, the haze from the air quality from the forest fires. My husband, the hay was just not drying, and you could look right into the sun. Don't recommend it. But because of the haze from the pollution, so we're living with these impacts now. So we need to invest, the federal government must invest in mitigation and adaptation. And the other thing too is going forward for everyone else, we all like to eat food, I believe. We need the guaranteed livable income will help to make and keep food affordable as prices go up, because the supply goes down because of the extreme weather events occurring even here in Kanata Carleton. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Jenna Suds.
Thank you. You know, I spent, I want to say a week, maybe it was even a week and a half, long days out in Dunrobin helping with the sandbagging during the floods. And it was devastating. It was devastating for the community, but it was heartwarming to see the response of our community step forward in such a difficult time. Likewise with the tornado, my husband was very involved, and we know how difficult that was for those that were impacted. It was just a few kilometers from our home, and I know my children are forever afraid of wind ever since. Climate change is definitely happening here in Kanata Carleton. And climate change is definitely the greatest long-term threat that we face as a global community. But we need to recognize that it is also our greatest economic opportunity. We have the skilled workforce, we have the innovative drive, we have the natural resources, we have the capacity here in Kanata, not just Canada, but in Kanata, to help the world address this growing crisis. Our Liberal Party has been hard at work. We've created new middle-class jobs for Canadians by making Canada a world leader in batteries to power the green economy, and helping industries adapt clean technologies to cut pollution. We're working to create cleaner communities with cleaner air by providing grants towards zero-emission vehicles, like the one in my driveway, and installing more charging infrastructure across the country and here in Kanata Carleton. And we're also working to build a net zero electricity grid by 2035. We are also working to drive down emissions from oil and gas to meet our shared goal of net zero emissions by 2050 and phase out coal by 2030. We've made a lot of great progress since 2015. We've put a price on pollution that's putting money back in the pockets of Canadians. We've made new green investments in public transit. We've committed to planting 2 billion trees to cut pollution and create jobs. We're banning harmful single-use plastics to protect our oceans by 2030. We are taking tangible, meaningful steps that are helping to address climate change. I'd add just one more piece, and that is specific around these changing weather patterns. And we are committed to helping Canadians make their homes more resilient from climate change through retrofits and upgrades. There was a recent program announced to this effect that will help us afford to make those investments in our home.
Please.
Thank you.
Thank you. Melissa Conrad.
Thank you. So I think that I also spent time filling sandbags during the flood and when the waters were rising. I don't live out there, but there was definitely a need. And during that time, I know a bunch of my team were out there too. And you know, it was a hard time listening to people's stories, listening to people concerned, waking up multiple times in the middle of the night to see if the water had breached around their sandbags around their home, and the stress that that caused. And I didn't live through that, so I can't say that I know what that feeling is like, but I did listen to many stories, and it's very real. And people are fearful every spring that it's going to be an issue that we have. The tornado was catastrophic for people. There's people still displaced. people that I've knocked on their doors and said, I'm still not back in my home. It's not rebuilt. We are having issues with our insurance companies. So there is a lot of work to be done that's very close to home here for us. And I think that we have to focus on action now. The current government has had many years to action green economies and green initiatives, and they bought a pipeline instead of investing that money into infrastructure and grids and transit that is green. And that's out there forever. Everyone knows that. So I think that we need a government that's going to implement these things now, not later after wealthy people get their fair cut of the deal, and then maybe we'll invest. We have to invest now. People are seeing the change. I grew up in a farm town, and crop loss has been year over year devastating for families and exports. And so we need to recognize that as well. So we need to invest now, and the NDP is going to invest now in getting our GHGs down and investing where they can without putting the burden on families to retrofit their own homes. Because as we know, coming out of this pandemic, most people can't afford that, even with helps. So the NDP really wants to focus on what can they do federally, federal buildings, federal fleets of vehicles, investing in green transit. And that's what we're going to do so that the burden isn't on everyday Canadians that are just trying to get by right now, who can't afford to retrofit, who can't afford to buy electric cars and charging stations. Because although we'd like to get there with people, a lot of people right now aren't there and they don't have that money to spend. So we need to invest as a government where we can in our own home, being the buildings that they own, control, run, rent, lease, the fleets that they have, and then look to expanding it out to the rest of Canadians.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you to all the candidates for your responses to topic number 3. We'll move on to topic number 4 now, which is health. The COVID-19 pandemic has revealed enormous problems with our healthcare system, including inadequate care for seniors living in long-term care homes and a critical shortage of healthcare professionals, particularly nurses. What do you see as the long-term impact of the COVID pandemic on Canada's healthcare environment? And how can we fix these issues to ensure we are better prepared for the next pandemic? Jennifer McAndrew.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I think that we can all say we've seen the impact the pandemic has had on this. We realize even more than before how important the role is of our first line workers. Those are the people who are out there risking everything for our most vulnerable sector, and we need to support them and have their backs like they have ours. Our provinces, their health resources have been stretched thin. There should have been additional funds available to them by the federal government and provided help when it was needed. What we're proposing in our plan is to put nearly $60 billion into our healthcare system so that we can help Canada and the provinces where they need it the most. The COVID crisis is something terrible that we're coming through. Thankfully, we're at the end of it. But I think what is going to outlast this even more is the mental health crisis that we're now going to face. And I know some of my other candidates have touched on this. I don't think we can fully understand or appreciate how much this will affect people in the years to come. So we're not just talking about the next 4 months. We're talking about the next 4 years, the next 10 years. We need to recognize that mental health is health, and we need to help people who have issues, who have problems, who are challenged, because, the pandemic came on and we supported Canadians the best we could, and we need to continue doing that as we move forward. The Conservative plan is going to get beds built for mental health facilities where kids are dealing with addiction, they're dealing with health crises, and we need to do that. As I mentioned, I'm on the board with the Dave Smith Foundation, and this pandemic has hit them hard. We're seeing that capacities have been decreased. People aren't being able to get access to the services that they need to be healthy. Mental health and addiction go hand in hand, and it's something that we're going to be facing. It's scary, but I think it's our job to help where we can. We're also, just to touch on quickly before my time's out, we want to boost the number of long-term care support workers, and the Conservative plan will be devoting $3 billion towards those initiatives.
Thank you, Jennifer. Jennifer Purdy.
Okay, so I have been experiencing the pandemic up close, of course, because I've been working at the COVID assessment clinic on Moody Drive since April of 2020. And what I've been seeing, and we test, of course, doctors and nurses who come in to that facility for testing and for assessment as well. So what's the long-term impact? Well, short-term, we're losing doctors and nurses before the retirement and PSWs as well, because they are burnt out and they are leaving their professions. Long-term also, this is squeezing the healthcare system in terms of funding, because the federal government, both Conservative and Liberal, over the last couple of decades, have been defunding and decreasing the Canada Health transfers, and they're no longer reflecting the actual demographics and needs of the various provinces and territories. So that needs to be reversed, and that's what the Green Party would do. But the other thing too, of course, is that the Liberals and Conservatives have been doing this fight in public over the last week over a public healthcare system becoming privatized. Both parties know that they have been looking the other way while privatization increases in Canada over the last couple of decades. That is the fact. So the Green Party, of course, wants to protect the publicly funded healthcare system. And what we would do, we would increase the Canada Health transfers. We also want to get pharmacare and long-term care into the Canada Health Act. The Liberals have said they don't want to interfere with the provinces with long-term care. Well, the provinces have demonstrated that they cannot be trusted to take care of and to reform long-term care. After all, there's many Liberals and Conservatives who have benefited either as lobbyists or being on the various boards of the private corporations owning the long-term care organizations out there. So we want to reform the Canada Health Act to include pharmacare and the long-term care and put that into the CHA. We also, in terms of preventing the next pandemic, we need a public inquiry to see what went well, both at the federal and provincial, like the joint response, to see what went well, but also the lessons learned, because there will be another pandemic. The only question is when. Even in the last year, there have been various outbreaks around the world that just haven't become their own pandemic. Public Health Agency of Canada actually had a great, intelligence system, and that was, of course, defunded and resources placed elsewhere under the Liberal government. That needs to be reversed. And of course, guaranteed livable income, pharmacare, affordable housing, all these things will help for essential workers and everyone for the next pandemic, because that's one of the things that kept essential workers in dangerous situations was lack of sick leave, lack of a guaranteed livable income, so they were forced to go into unsafe workplaces. Thank you.
Thank you. Jenna Suds.
Thank you. I think Canadians really value our universal healthcare system. It's part of who we are as Canadians, and I think we pride ourselves on it. But I do think that we saw it at its worst at times in the pandemic. And we've now seen the hard work that needs to be done in the months and years to come. On the positive side, I think that it has shown us what we need to do. So the long term, we know what investments we need to make. And the Liberal Party is committed to providing better access for healthcare for all Canadians. We had your back throughout COVID and will continue to do so. Since 2015, we have transferred $4.5 billion in one-time top-ups in the Canadian health transfer, to the provinces, reducing wait lists and working towards better health outcomes. We are committed to working with the provinces and territories to help hire at least 7,500 family doctors and nurses to support the elimination of wait lists that we know have worsened throughout the pandemic and expand virtual healthcare services. We'll also invest in recruiting a range of healthcare professionals. We know Canadians value our public healthcare system, and a re-elected Liberal government will continue to ensure that our healthcare is there for us when we need it most. I also want to comment on the Liberal Party's commitment to long-term care and specifically support for seniors. We will work to raise wages for PSWs, as we've seen how hard they've worked and how essential they are throughout this pandemic, to a guaranteed minimum wage of $25. We'll also train up to 50,000 new PSWs, and we are committed to developing a national standard for long-term care homes to ensure our loved ones, our seniors, get the care that they deserve no matter where they live. We saw during the pandemic, we deployed the Canadian Armed Forces to support staff and seniors. We supplied PPE and contact tracing support and provided wage boosts, including PSWs. We are committed to making sure that our healthcare system is there for all Canadians. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenna. Melissa Conrad.
Thank you. So having worked in a COVID testing facility during the pandemic and having been exposed on more than one occasion to open vials of COVID-19, I can tell you there are many, many flaws in our current healthcare system. And I think that the Liberal government has spent the last 6 years not really understanding what the needs of the provinces are, because these flaws are not new. They're brought to light and our system is failing us. We are going more and more private, more and more two-tier. People walk into my clinic and say, I need this blood test, I need this genetic test. And I say, okay, great, this is gonna cost you $200. That is the reality of our current system. And people can't afford that and they don't get this testing done. On top of that, the Liberal government did not provide PPE until hundreds, if not over 1,000 people had died in long-term care before they stepped in and said, yes, there's a problem here. Then the military was deployed. And anyone who read that report was astonished at the lack of care. People were starving to death, dying of dehydration, and left in soiled linens. That is the reality of the current state of our care system. NDP will prioritize making long-term care homes public. These elderly that have worked so hard are spending upwards of $5,000 a month in these homes and going bankrupt and being kicked out. That is the reality of these homes. $78 billion in profit were paid out to shareholders of long-term care homes during this pandemic. It is shameful that the current government has allowed this to happen. We absolutely need to make this public. We need mental health services in our communities. We need mental health services that are free for our healthcare workers because many are burnt out and off work. People are retiring early. They're changing careers because of the catastrophic failure of our system. I'm still currently working and campaigning because I cannot get time off because we are so short-staffed. And I don't want to leave my team and I was not granted time off. So there is a lot to be done, and it's unfortunate that the Liberal government thinks things are going well in healthcare because they are not going well in healthcare. There isn't enough money in healthcare. We have to increase the transfers to 6%, and we have to make sure that people have public, free access to the supports that they need because that is not available right now.
Thank you, Melissa. Scott Miller.
I actually agree with Dr. Purdy. I would love to see an inquiry, an inquest to see what we did well and what we did poorly, because there's a great many things we've done very poorly. Long-term care in Canada was a disaster. Somebody alluded to the military coming in and find out people had been starved to death. And this is, I don't know if it's just because it was a private long-term care facility, the same sort of things can happen in public. It's not just a matter of money. It's not a matter of private versus public. It's a matter of figuring out something that works and works best and works the most cost effectively. There's private healthcare in Canada. There's some real advantages to it. In many countries in the world, if you need an MRI, you can go out and get it that day. If somebody wants to set up an MRI clinic and can do it for less than we can do it in-house at the Civic or the General, well, let's do that. Let's do what makes sense. If you can build a long-term care home, I got an email from somebody. There's a plan to make some of the long-term care homes public facilities that are currently private. I can tell you the private ones haven't worked out very well. The public ones might not work out very well either because of the just natural inadequacy of government. Central planning has enormous problems. So some sort of a hybrid approach might be best. That's condominium long-term care homes where you buy a piece of it. You're not just a resident, but you're an owner, and you can sit and contribute. and your family can have a say in what happens in that home. Maybe a solution like that. We need to figure out what works. One of the things that works is to keep people in their homes as long as possible, and that takes personal support workers. My parents are at the state right now. They've been married 66 years, and they're in a position where, because my dad needs more care than my mom, they might be split up for the first time when they try to find a place. It's difficult and it's expensive to find somebody to come into the home daily to do this sort of thing that you don't want in an institutional environment. They'd both be, everyone would be better off the longer they can stay in their homes. So I wouldn't say it should be, I would never support an all public approach. I would definitely not support an all private approach. Government regulation definitely has a place. We need to set standards, but let's just figure out what works best and do that.
Thank you, Scott. We'll now move on to our fifth topic, which is governance. Our current electoral system is not fair, as voters that do not vote for the winning party are not represented. The Liberals promised to change this in 2015, yet the current election will once again be using the first past the post system. Will you support and work towards a more fair and democratic proportional representation system for Canada? First question, Jennifer Purdy.
Yes, excellent question, of course, because the Greens and the NDP have actually been a fan of electoral reform for quite a while, and it's been a very frustrating journey. If memory serves, Mr. Trudeau first promised this in 2015. I made that promise maybe 200 times or so during that election campaign. And then, of course, when the tea leaves changed and he had a majority, all of a sudden, the people, meaning him and the PMO, did not want it anymore, and so it was abandoned. So yes, of course, the Green Party of Canada, we have been on the record for quite a while, even prior to 2015, as being in favor of electoral reform. It will actually, when it is done properly, like for example, New Zealand, it actually gives us more stable governments, and governments where it's encouraged to, for people to work together. Like I said in my opening, I actually played a lot of team sports growing up in Canada, both in school and in the community. And there, the military, medicine, I've always been encouraged to play well with others, to work well with others, to be a team player. And yet what we hear from the Liberals is they don't want to play with anyone. It's kind of like high school cliques all over again. And it looks like Jenna's going from one clique, the Watson team, to another clique with the Liberals. But it's not giving us good government. Clearly, because again, 6 years, Liberals in charge. This last 2 years, other parties quite happy to work with them, and yet here we are in an unnecessary election. So what the Greens would like to see is obviously modernizing our electoral system. If we've had this system in place for couple of centuries, I think it's about time for a change, number one. And we'd like to see proportional representation. We also want to see lowering the voting age to 16. People at 16 can drive. I started to drive when I was 16. Probably everybody else here did as well. So we're old enough to drive a car. And the other thing too, that 16-year-olds today don't experience what we experienced here, the panel experienced when we were 16, is that the planet's on fire, right? So it makes sense that we should be lowering the voting age as well. We also want to see online voting. That would be a heck of a lot easier for everyone who's in post-secondary institutions this year. And Elections Canada is unable, due to the pandemic and somehow not thinking that there would be an election this fall. They haven't prepared for students voting on campus. So online voting would solve that problem. And the other thing too is that, of course, we would be looking at mandatory voting, but we would be looking for the evidence, because again, we're an evidence-based party. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Jenna Suds.
Thank you. And I'd just like to acknowledge Jennifer Purdy's comments. I'm very proud of my track record at City Council and the opportunity to serve as City Council, and would be very proud to be the elected representative as part of the Liberal Party. I would note, thinking back to, I think it was around 2017, when we were talking about proportional representation, that there was really a lack of consensus at the time on the issue. The electoral system being something on which there needs to be widespread agreement. And that did not happen throughout these discussions. And it would be irresponsible of us to do something that harms Canada's stability. There needs to be
Sorry.
There needs to be a path forward in which we can have a discussion where we can have widespread agreement on how we move forward with respect to electoral reform. I know efforts were made to hear from all as a special committee that conducted hearings and traveled the country. Postcards were mailed. I remember getting mine to 14 million households to promote an online survey to gather feedback through this process. So, I think there were a lot of efforts made, and there's still work to be done in that regard. I'd also circle back to the importance of the election and the election that we're having right now. It's our democratic right to vote. And this election is all about choice. The last time that a mandate was given to the Liberal government in 2019, in the last election, COVID wasn't even a thing. Yet here we are, COVID-19 exists and we've governed through it. And yet it's had broad impacts on how we had to govern and how our residents and Canadians have been impacted. So where some people might try to tell you that you don't deserve to have a voice in how Canada should lead forward as we go through this pandemic and recover, I disagree. It is your voice that should dictate how Canada should enter into the future, and you exercise that through your vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenna. Melissa Conrad.
Thank you. So as Jennifer Purdy said, the NDP has been very vocal about wanting to implement electoral reform. And it's unfortunate that the Liberal candidate didn't really answer the question whether she was in support of it or not, other than pointing out that Mr. Trudeau has committed to it in 2015, 2019, and yet again now. So if they committed to something that they couldn't do, I think that speaks volumes in and of itself. And if they committed to something and recognized it wasn't in their best interest, that also speaks volumes. So either way that goes, that was a promise given and another promise not kept. And I think that people do have the choice in this election, but it's not about choice. If the Liberal government chose to continue to govern us out of this pandemic, we wouldn't be in this election. They chose to give you the choice for a better party to govern you out of this election because they clearly don't think they can handle it, or they didn't want to work with the other parties, or we would not be here. So the NDP has the courage to bring us out of this pandemic and to stabilize our government with electoral reform so we can all work well together and every party can have their say moving forward. They also have the courage to bring 20,000 units of affordable housing to Ottawa, and some of them in Kanata Carleton, LRT, pharmacare, and many other things that will make your life more affordable coming out of this pandemic, to get our economy up and running, to get you that disposable income that many, many people do not have right now, to go out and spend in our communities to keep our businesses running. And that takes courage. And that is the choice that you have now, to elect a government that has the courage to do that, and not one that clearly doesn't think they can govern us out of this pandemic and has now given you the choice to choose a better party. And that party is the NDP.
Thank you. Thank you, Melissa. Scott Miller.
I never paid a lot of attention to the options for electoral reform because I never really thought it would happen. So I don't really have an opinion of all the different flavors and how the voting works and what the choices were. Certainly open to the idea of changing things. The way our electoral system was set up, parliamentary system, when Confederation happened, you elected your local representatives and it would take days or weeks to get to Ottawa. They'd vote, you'd have to trust them to represent your interests there, and they weren't in constant communication. The world has definitely changed that way. So there's a good case to be made that we could change the way our representative system works. Maybe a Swiss style referendums where the people get to directly vote on on issues of the day, far more than they do here. But of course, whoever wins the election and however they win it, they're going to favor the system that put them there. And that's why I never bothered to look at it, because I'm quite cynical in that way. We did the Elections Canada, we do some things very, very right compared to our neighbors to the south. We've always had strong voter ID. Votes are counted by hand. I have faith in Elections Canada in the way we do that. We won't get American style shenanigans in our electoral system. I'm very grateful for that. So in terms of electoral reform, yeah, if that's what we want, I don't really have a strong opinion, but we can definitely improve the system we have. We could also make it worse. So we need to proceed. If we proceed, we'd have to proceed carefully. But I think it's worth pursuing. And I'll reiterate, the only reason the current government changed their mind is because they won.
Thank you, Scott. Jennifer McAndrew.
Perfect, thanks. Am I off mute? Okay, thank you. So I think, as we can see, electoral reform is something we would consider, but it is something that the constituents of our riding and the entire country need to be a part of that discussion. And that would be a topic for a referendum so that we're able to hear their voices. You know, we talk a lot about choice. You know, apparently we're having this election because as Canadians, it's our right to choose. But at the end of the day, we didn't have a choice about not going to the polls. This was pushed on us. We're out at the doors knocking. And one of the topic that comes up the most that we're hearing from our constituents in Kanata Carleton is, why in the world are we having an election now? Why are we not focused on coming through the pandemic, on getting people back to work, on getting our kids back to school? Why are we encouraging people to go out if we have such a fear of the pandemic, or why are we putting them in a situation where they're now potentially at risks? You know, I think that as we've seen this, one of the biggest things that, you know, Canadians are saying is they want to see an accountable government that they can trust. The Conservative plan, one of our main pillars is about accountability and our ability to be trusted by the Canadian people. You know, we're passing anti-corruption laws to strengthen those. We're toughening the Conflict of Interest Acts, and we're amending the Canada Evidence Act. We want people to have confidence in our government. We want it to be a transparent government. We don't want Canadians to be embarrassed on a world stage because of the scandals of our leaders. It's not the position that we see ourselves in as Canadians. We're very proud of the history that we have as being open, and that's what we need to represent. And unfortunately, you know, we need to be accountable to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. We've now arrived at our sixth and final topic for this evening, which relates to support for Indigenous and Black-owned businesses. The federal government recently put in place new rules for government contracts with a view to support Indigenous and Black-owned businesses. What is your position on this initiative, and how would you support the growth of minority-led businesses in Kanata Carleton? Jenna Suds.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I would say that I firmly believe that diversity is our strength. That's why we want to build a Canada that welcomes and celebrates all cultures and all people. COVID-19 has definitely disproportionately affected low-wage workers, young people, women, and racialized Canadians. For businesses, it's really been a two-speed recession, with some finding ways to pivot and succeed, but many, especially small businesses, fighting to survive. We've made some historic investments to finish the fight against COVID-19 and address certain issues that have surfaced throughout COVID-19, putting people first, creating jobs, growing the middle class, and setting up businesses for long-term growth. I know that we've done a great job extending emergency measures like the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy and the Emergency Rent Subsidy to incentivize rehiring and recovery. We have also invested $150 million to boost women entrepreneurship strategy and about $52 million in added funding for Black entrepreneurship program. And more than $60 million for an Indigenous entrepreneurship program. So the Liberal plan is a plan that bridges Canadians and Canadian businesses through the crisis and towards our recovery. It also includes training for youth, about 500,000 new training and work opportunities, including 250,000 opportunities for youth. We know small businesses are the heart of our economy. And we know that many big multinational companies have actually prospered throughout COVID. So our small businesses need our help, and we need to help them heal the wounds of COVID-19, and that requires government support. I know some of my colleagues have been instrumental at Parliament. There's the Black Caucus, and there's been a number of requests through this caucus that have resulted in tangible results. And that, as I mentioned, we had our first of its kind Black entrepreneurship program. This program made loans of up to $250,000 to Black business owners and entrepreneurs. And also Black-led nonprofits, which we can't forget about as they work to provide better support in communities and offer mental health and wellness support. So I know a re-elected Liberal government will continue this great work and strengthen our equity targets. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenna. Melissa Conrad.
Thank you. So we know that small businesses of all kinds are struggling to get back on their feet, even just to break even. Many of them are going into the negative month over month still. We also know there is a major shortage in the workforce right now. People are afraid to go back to work. People can't find childcare and therefore can't go back to work. We still know that there are 10 times the number of women as men out of the workforce still due to COVID-19. So the NDP is looking to help with training of employees and getting people ready to be back in the workforce. Also with affordable childcare that is accessible in all communities, women will have the capacity and the assurance that their child is cared for so that they can go back to work. Affordable housing will get people very possibly closer to places that they can work because a lot of people can't afford transit to get there. We think that transit subsidies and getting light rail and bus routes out into all communities will also help people get employees into their doors so that they can have fully running, fully functioning businesses again. And once they have that up and running, then they will be able to have increased revenue, because a lot of times people are saying, oh, I went here, it wasn't open, or it's only open for half days still. And so the more we can get the economy up and running for all small businesses, the better that that's going to be. And specifically, we need to look at rural areas where this is a much larger issue, where people have to have vehicles, teenagers, young people in their early 20s that can't always get around and get to some of these businesses. In Indigenous areas, training is a large issue, and getting people out to the organizations has been flagged, and people have said it's hard recruiting in these areas. So we need to invest in the businesses and invest in the infrastructure in communities, so that people can get to these businesses and people can feel safe going back to work coming out of this pandemic.
Thank you, Melissa. Scott Miller.
I think it's actually astonishing that in this day and age, we're treating people differently at the government level because of their skin. There's a committee somewhere I read when they introduced this Black Business Boost that has to decide if somebody is Black enough to receive that. I just can't imagine the stare around the tables as people had to make that decision. In the end, I think they outsourced that to somebody else. But you don't correct historical inequities by introducing new ones. There's no reason a government should treat Canadian citizens differently if they come from Sri Lanka or Shanghai or Sudbury. Treating somebody, giving them boost if they're from Nairobi versus Nepal versus Nova Scotia is not the way forward. We should not be doing that. A government should be treating every single citizen the same, regardless of the color of their skin or where they're from. For non-Canadian citizens, they're on their own. But for Canadian citizens, it doesn't matter if you're from Paris or from Pakistan. Your government should be treating you equitably. Now, I say equitably. Some people could misinterpret that to say not equitably, but I mean actually treating you the same. Nothing in law should be discriminating on this basis. I would argue, I heard Jana say that traditional diversity is our strength, having worked with people from all over the world in high tech in Canada. Diversity in itself is not our strength. Our strength is accepting talent from wherever it comes. I have worked from people from virtually every country you can name. And in the high tech field, it's very common. And good people are good people regardless of where they come from. So you don't need to pander to somebody based on the Pantone value of their skin. This is Canada. We treat everyone with fairness, respect.
Thank you, Scott. Jennifer McAndrew.
Thank you so much. Just getting to listen to the other candidates, this is an issue that hits close to home. I am a female entrepreneur. I work with my family in a small business day in, day out to keep a roof over our heads. The pandemic, we were traveling right along, we were moving, we were growing, we were excited. The pandemic comes and all of a sudden our income is down to zero. We just had our best month ever since the pandemic hit, and we still lost thousands and thousands of dollars. And that was our best month since March of 2020. The Conservative plan is going to support all small businesses. We realize that this is the way back, and this is going to drive our economy forward. We're going to get people back to work. I know how, the challenges we faced with the programs that were offered to us during the pandemic, especially, they talked about landlord rent relief. Our landlord told us it was too complicated and not in his best interest to go ahead and get these programs. His options to me were 1, go to the bank and get more money, or 2, go bankrupt. After 15 years, he told me my business was not worth anything and I should go bankrupt. What did we do? We sold our house, we bought our piece of land, and now we're operating out of the basement of my in-laws' house, just so we can keep the lights on and we can keep our employees paid. We pivoted, we've done all the crazy things that we can do, but we need to know that our government appreciates small business. A 10% wage subsidy that was offered was ludicrous. 10% of what we're paying people will not make a dent. Thankfully, the Conservative government came on and pushed through a 75% wage subsidy, which is allowing us to keep our lights on and keep new people employed. We had students that got jobs for the first time. That's what we need to see. We need to get people back to work, give them these experiences that they haven't had before so that they can go on and contribute to our society in a meaningful way. For us, it was the most challenging 18 months. I helped my friends who did not know how to read government speak write grants and proposals so they could keep their lights on and not close and go out of business because everything was way too hard. We need to level the playing field so that the small guy has the opportunity that the big companies have. That's what our Conservative plan is going to do. We are going to be able to help with subsidies for wage moving forward. And that's what we want. We want people back at work, contributing to Canada and making us stronger and better altogether. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. And Jennifer Purdy.
So when I was in the military, I learned it was good to come up with a plan and not dither over it, but come up with a plan quickly and then course correct as necessary. So in the spring of 2020, when COVID hit, the federal government did come up with a plan relatively quickly, oftentimes with help from the NDP and the Greens. But what happened was that when there were flaws in the wage subsidy or in the rent subsidy, course corrections would occur, but they would not identify and deal with the issues that had actually been raised. So I too, back in the spring, like many doctors, the provincial government just decided not to pay us for a couple of months while we transitioned to
Internet victim.
Are you able to hear me?
Now
We are now.
Sorry. So basically, what I was saying was I almost had to close my practice last year because of COVID and because none of the programs I didn't qualify for any of them, and it wasn't because I was doing so well. So what the Greens are not in favor, because right now the subsidies are supposed to end, I believe, in October, right after the election, conveniently enough. But that means that small businesses will have to deal with post-pandemic recovery by themselves without any federal assistance right now. The CEWS is going to be replaced with the Canada Recovery Hiring Program, which does not cover pay for employees on paid leave, putting both small businesses and employees at risk. Small businesses still obviously need a lot of support, and the Green Party platform, we're evidence-based, and we're not just about large corporations. So we want to make sure that they have the support that they need. So what we will do is we will extend the wage and the rent subsidies until the COVID-19 pandemic related restrictions are fully lifted, i.e. once we've stopped having our various waves and that sort of thing. Hold the small business tax rate at no more than 9%. And then the other thing too is that because there was a question specific for people who might need a bit more help, and that would be we would promote entrepreneurship training and business support, especially for women, Blacks, other people of color, and Indigenous entrepreneurs. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. And that concludes our question and answer period on these very 6 important topics. And we thank the 5 candidates for their responses. We'll now proceed to the closing remarks. Reminder that each candidate has 2 minutes for their closing remarks. And we'll begin with Jennifer McAndrew.
Great. Thank you so much again for having me this evening. In closing, Canada's Conservatives, we have a plan to secure the future for Kanata Carleton, from the largest technology park in Canada to our farms west of the city and the small businesses in every corner of our community from Carp to Constance Bay. I am proud of the Conservative Party and that we have publicly committed to prioritize funding for the Stage 3 LRT out to Kanata. Earlier this year, I did the hard work to put forward a proposal to our party to show the importance and cost benefits of having the LRT to support our vibrant and growing communities. The Conservative Party and Aaron O'Toole himself have specifically committed to getting the LRT to Kanata. This connected transportation is vital, not only to ensure the greater mobility for those within our community, but means more business and tourism opportunities for Kanata Carleton. I'm so excited about this local investment from our Conservative Party. As we were saying, I know how hard it was for small businesses over the last 18 months. I know because I went through it with them. Our local businesses are the heartbeat of the community. They invest locally and employ our residents. The better they do, the better the community does. I will be a champion for our local businesses and those who they employ. It will be the power of Canadian businesses, the people they employ, and the products they produce in every region, in every sector of our economy that will help get Canada back on track. We need to focus on policies that make things better for the everyday Canadian. I'm thrilled to be the Conservative candidate for Kanata Carleton. My deep roots, growing up from Beaverbrook to Glencairn to Morgan's Grant and now in Carp. I'm a respected small business owner, a dedicated community volunteer, and a proven leader. I'm ready to be a strong and passionate member of Parliament. Canada's Conservatives are the only choice to secure the future. Let's get to work. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jennifer. Scott Miller.
The last 18 months, we have witnessed an unprecedented assault on our civil liberties, and we need freedom now more than ever. People have, there's a lot of popular support for the idea of vax passports, and people are supporting it because they're afraid. But I remind people in December 7th, 1941, we declared war on Japan. Within a few months, there were plans in place to round up 24,000 Japanese Canadians, 16,000 of whom were Canadian citizens, or born in Canada, not just Canadian citizens, and ship them to concentration camps. It was a very popular idea at the time, and it was because of fear. But with some time, with some distance, we can see that that was a shameful reaction for no good reason at all. And that's the kind of reaction I think people will have once this is all over, of the behavior that we have enabled governments. We've cheered in some cases for governments to do. The lockdowns, the segregation, the abuses on people, all in the name of fear. It became clear, I would say in March of 2020, this was pretty scary. The stuff that's coming out of China, which we now know was a fair degree of bullshit. The stories coming out of Italy, things looked scary. But by the end of April of 2020, we could see this was not the Spanish flu. This was not the Black Death. The story remains to be written. But right now, it appears that our reaction to the pandemic was caused far more injury, and it's going to continue for years than the pandemic itself. So the PPC says no to lockdowns. We say no to vax passports. We say vote no to censorship. We say vote no to fear. You can vote yes for hope, yes for free speech, yes to get this country back to normal, back to the country we grew up in or the country we thought we were moving to. I've spoken with a large number of immigrants who are looking, particularly from Eastern Europe, who are looking back at their home countries and saying they don't look so bad now, because the countries, the kind of things they escaped from in Eastern Europe are the direction we're headed. So the PPC says yes to freedom, and you can't have too much freedom. The more you get, the better. We are all essential, and you are the best person to decide how your life should be led. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Melissa Conrad.
Thank you. So we've heard tonight that both the Liberal and Conservative candidates are not interested in electoral reform. We have heard that the Conservative Party is looking to scrap the current childcare programs for a return on your taxes, which will make life unaffordable for many, many women to get back in the workplace, because that monthly subsidy is sometimes all it takes to get women back in the workplace. The NDP is the only party that has the courage to do what it takes to make life more affordable for Canadians right now, not in 5 years from now, not after legislations are written, but right now, with $5,000 for renters to get back on their feet, pay their rent, and take that burden away. With 500,000 units of affordable housing, and 20,000 of those specifically in Ottawa, and probably out in Kanata Carleton, because we have this space to build them. With investments in green transit, like light rail out to Kanata and beyond, because Kanata Carleton does not stop at Kanata. With $10 a day childcare that's reliable, that will help families have both parents back in the workplace because they can afford daycare, because there are many, many, many women who literally cannot afford to go back to the jobs that they have once they have children, because childcare can be upwards of $1,200 a month in this city alone. With pharmacare, that will take the burden of medications off of families and small businesses so that they can offer that to keep family members and employees healthy and at work. The NDP, Jagmeet Singh, and I will fight for you as average Canadians, and not billion-dollar companies, not fattening their pockets, but putting money back in your pockets. And the NDP is the only party that has the courage to do what it takes immediately and going forward to bring all Canadians, and not just the wealthiest, out of this pandemic and get Canada back on its feet.
Thank you, Melissa. Jenna Suds.
Thank you. We have a decision to make. We cannot move backwards. The decisions we make now as we work to get out of this pandemic are critical to our future and that of our children and our grandchildren. I wholeheartedly believe that the party that has led us through these last difficult 18 months is the best party to lead us through the next 18 months and beyond. We need a Liberal government re-elected to continue the hard work to finish the fight against COVID. The Liberal Party will continue in our quest to create 1 million jobs. We'll harness Canadian innovative spirit and natural resources to lead in green technologies and job creation, ensuring we meet our climate commitments and helping other countries do the same. We're committed to providing stronger healthcare for everyone, and we will provide better, more affordable housing with a home buyer's bill of rights and increasing the stock of housing. We'll introduce $10 daycare, and we're committed to investing in electric light rail transit to Kanata. We will support Kanata's small businesses and the innovation coming out of our technology park, ensuring continued growth and employment right here in Kanata. When you go to the polls, I'm asking you to think about the future and to think about the past. Who on this ballot has been committed to serving our community throughout their career? Who has proven themselves capable and ready to serve you at the federal level? Who really cares about you and your community? I know you've counted on me to stop the development of the Kanata Golf and Country Club, to get the Campo Road extension built and the March Road repaved, just to name a few, and I've delivered. And now I'm asking you to vote for me, Jenna Suds, and support my desire to serve you in this bigger capacity. Thank you. Merci. Miigwech.
Thank you, Jenna. Jennifer Purdy.
So thank you for taking the time to tune in this evening. We have heard different perspectives about some very important issues. And at the same time, in the media, there's much focus on national level politics and who will win and who will lose. Regardless of what party wins, we need to take a team-based, all hands on deck approach to moving forward in the next couple of years. We can't afford to have cliques running Parliament, especially in a pandemic, especially with worsening climate change, and especially with a crisis in Afghanistan that we have failed on insofar. I don't understand. I am a team player, and unlike the other candidates here tonight, I cannot be benched or outright fired by my party for speaking my mind or for voting the way my constituents tell me to vote. This freedom and ethical obligation to do the right thing for constituents, to listen to them, to work with MPs regardless of their party, this is what will make me such a valuable resource and asset for Kanata Carleton. I will work for you and for no one else. I'm an evidence-based doctor, and the Green Party is an evidence-based party. So if elected, of course, I will support subsidized childcare. I will get pharmacare done for everyone, decriminalizing drugs and ensuring safe supply to combat the opioid poisoning epidemic, long-term care reform, guaranteed livable income, and much, much more. Because we need to take care of people while we take concrete action on climate change, including canceling the pipeline immediately and oil and gas subsidies as well. We can have a better, brighter future for everyone. But right now, the big parties aren't paying attention to this because when they ignore these issues, they still get elected. Let's change this. Give me a chance to work hard with others, and to make it right for all of us. Vote for me, Jen Purdy. Thank you. Merci beaucoup. Bonne soirée.
Thank you. This concludes our session, the All Candidates Kanata Carleton session for this evening. I'd like to thank each of our 5 candidates for their time and their responses on these 6 very important topics, and also to our participants who attended this session virtually and gave us your time and attention. It's very much appreciated. I'm Chris Browell with the Kanata Lakes Community Session, wishing everyone a wonderful night. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.